The rich families laughed when the poor black boy said he wanted to be a hero someday. During the worst hurricane in years, when their expensive cars were floating away, they watched in shock as he did something unbelievable. Jaden's sneakers splashed through puddles as he walked home from school, the salt air thick in his lungs. A group of kids from the beachfront houses laughed ahead of him, their backpacks probably worth more than his entire wardrobe. "I'm going to be a hero someday," he muttered to himself, gripping his worn backpack straps tighter. The words had slipped out during class discussion, and now he couldn't escape the echoes of their laughter. "Did you guys hear that?" Tommy Morrison had sneered, his designer shoes propped on the desk. "The cleaning lady's kid thinks he's going to be a superhero." The memory made Jaden's stomach twist. He watched the group turn down their street of million-dollar homes, their voices fading into the constant sound of waves. His own street looked different. Small houses with peeling paint lined both sides, many still showing damage from the last big storm. The Andersons' roof still had a blue tarp over one corner. His house sat in the middle, the smallest on the block, but kept neat by his mom's relentless effort. "I'm home," he called out, pushing open the door that always stuck in humid weather. No answer. Mom was still at work, cleaning houses in the beachfront neighborhood. He dropped his backpack and headed straight for the kitchen, his stomach growling. The fridge held leftovers from 2 nights ago and half a gallon of milk. He grabbed both, eating cold spaghetti straight from the container. The kitchen window faced the ocean, visible between houses across the street. Dark clouds were building on the horizon. Weather had been weird lately, making his mom nervous. She always got nervous about storms since Dad left. Jaden's throat tightened at the thought. 3 years felt like forever and yesterday at the same time. He still remembered the fight, the slam of the door, Mom crying in the kitchen. "You're too weak to handle anything," Dad had spat at him before walking out. Jaden had been 8 then, frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The sound of keys in the door snapped him back. "Baby, you home?" His mom's voice carried through the house, tired but warm. "Kitchen." He quickly put away the leftovers as she appeared in the doorway, still in her light blue cleaning uniform. Her hair was frizzed from the humidity, but her smile lit up her whole face. "How was school?" She dropped her purse on the counter and pulled him into a hug. She smelled like cleaning products and sweat. "Fine." He didn't mention the superhero thing. "How was work?" Her smile tightened slightly. "Mrs. Morrison let me go today. Said they're cutting back on expenses." Jaden's chest got hot. "Tommy's mom?" "Of course. But don't you worry," she continued quickly, running a hand over his curly hair. "I've got 3 other houses, and Mrs. Chin said she might need extra help soon." The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose storm shutters they hadn't fixed yet. His mom glanced out the window, her forehead creasing. "They're saying there's a tropical storm forming," she said quietly. "Might hit us in a few days." Jaden followed her gaze to the darkening sky. "We still got the emergency kit from last time. Need to check the batteries and water." She straightened up, switching into planning mode. "After dinner. First, help me with these groceries. Got them on sale at Jackson's." They unpacked the bags together. Lots of canned goods, crackers, peanut butter. Storm food. The radio on the counter crackled with weather updates between old songs. Later, after dinner, Jaden sat on their small back porch, watching the waves. The beach was technically public, but the access point was a half-mile down, past the fancy houses. He'd learned to swim there anyway, spending every free moment in the water until he could outswim kids on the swim team. A door slammed next door, and he saw Sarah, their neighbor, struggling with grocery bags while trying to keep her baby from crying. The single mom had moved in 6 months ago. "Need help?" he called out. "I'm good, honey, thanks." She managed to get inside, the baby's cries muffled by the closing door. The wind carried the sound of more expensive cars arriving home in the beachfront section. Jaden thought about Tommy's words again, his hands clenched into fists. "A hero," he whispered to the darkening sky. "I'll show them." He didn't know the storm coming would test those words sooner than anyone expected. The weather report droned on inside, terms like rapid intensification and storm surge mixing with the growing sound of wind and waves. His mom called him in to check the emergency supplies. They had 4 gallons of water, batteries that still worked, canned food that would last a week. The radio suggested evacuation for waterfront residents, but they both knew that wasn't an option. Gas money was tight since Mrs. Morrison let Mom go. "We've weathered storms before," his mom said, trying to sound confident. But Jaden saw her hands shake as she counted their supplies again. That night, lying in bed, Jaden listened to the wind growing stronger. Palm fronds slapped against his window. The waves sounded angry now, like they were trying to climb the beach and reach the houses. He thought about Sarah next door with her baby, about the emergency kit that was probably too small, about his dad calling him weak. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by the increasing rattle of storm shutters and the distant sound of emergency vehicles. Tomorrow would be another normal day of school, he told himself. But something in the air felt different, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting. The last thing he heard before drifting off was a weather alert beeping on his mom's phone in the next room. The storm was growing stronger than expected, much stronger. Morning came with an eerie yellow light filtering through the storm shutters. Jaden woke to his mom, shaking his shoulder, her face tight with worry. "School's canceled," she said. The storm intensified overnight. "They're calling it Hurricane Marcus now." Jaden sat up, his heart pounding. Through the gaps in the shutters, he could see palm trees bending sideways. The constant roar of wind made it hard to hear anything else. "Category 3? He asked, remembering the hurricane scale from school. His mom shook her head. "They're saying it might hit as a 4. Her voice cracked slightly. "Remember what happened during Irma?" He did. 3 people had died in their neighborhood alone. Mr. Garcia, who lived 2 streets over, had drowned in his own living room when the storm surge hit. The power flickered, and his mom moved quickly to the kitchen. "Help me fill everything with water while we still have pressure." They worked silently, filling bathtubs, sinks, and every container they could find. The radio droned in the background, its normally cheerful morning host sounding tense. Storm surge expected to reach 12 to 15 feet in some areas. All residents in Zone A must evacuate immediately. I repeat, Zone A evacuation is mandatory. "That's us, isn't it?" Jaden asked, watching his mom's face. She nodded, hands gripping the edge of the sink. "The shelter's full. Called an hour ago. Next one's 30 miles inland. We can't get there. Cars almost empty. Gas stations are cleaned out." She forced a smile. "We'll be okay upstairs. House has stood this long." A crash from next door made them both jump. Through the kitchen window, Jaden saw Sarah struggling to put up plywood over her windows. Her baby wailed from somewhere inside. His mom grabbed her phone. "I'm calling her. She can stay with us." The call went straight to voicemail. Power lines were already getting spotty. Wind howled louder, and rain started coming down in sheets. Jaden thought about the stories his grandma used to tell about hurricanes in Haiti before she moved to Florida. About whole villages disappearing underwater. About children being swept away while their parents watched helplessly. "Mom?" His voice sounded small. "What if it floods like Irma?" She pulled him close, her heart beating fast against his ear. "We go upstairs. Take the emergency kit. Wait it out." The power went out with a final flicker at noon. Their phones showed only 1 bar of service now. The latest update showed Hurricane Marcus had strengthened again. Jaden paced the living room, watching water start to pool in the street. Cars from the beachfront area evacuated in a steady stream, their expensive SUVs and sedans heading inland. He recognized Tommy Morrison's family car among them. "Why do they get to leave?" he muttered. "Baby don't." His mom touched his shoulder. "Being angry won't help." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Sarah stood there, drenched, holding her baby tight against her chest. "My roof's leaking," she said, voice shaking. "Can we get in here?" His mom pulled them inside. "Upstairs. Now." They moved everything essential to the second floor as the wind grew stronger. The baby, Marcus, kept crying despite Sarah's attempts to comfort him. "Shoo, baby boy, shoo," she whispered, bouncing him gently. "It's okay, it's just a storm." But it wasn't okay. Even Jaden could tell this storm was different. The wind didn't just howl anymore. It screamed. Rain hit the windows like bullets. And the ocean sounded wrong. His mom's phone beeped with an emergency alert. Her face went pale as she read it. "What?" Jaden asked. "Storm surge warning. They're saying 15 to 20 feet now." Sarah gasped. "But we're only 12 feet above sea level." His mom finished. "I know." They gathered in Jaden's room, the highest point in the house. His mom tried calling emergency services again, but the phones were dead now. The radio batteries died an hour later. Through the shutters, they watched the street disappear underwater. First inches, then feet. A car floated by, Mr. Anderson's old Chevy. The water kept rising. "It's going to reach us," Sarah whispered, clutching Marcus tighter. "Oh God, it's going to reach us?" Jaden thought about his swimming skills, about the countless hours spent in these same waters when they were calm and blue. Now they were brown and angry, filled with debris. A massive crash shook the house. Through the window, they saw a part of Sarah's roof tear away. "My house," she choked out. "Everything I own." His mom hugged her with one arm, keeping her other hand on Jaden's shoulder. The room grew darker as the storm intensified. Water crept up the stairs, inch by inch. They could hear things hitting the house now. Branches, pieces of other homes, parts of people's lives turned into missiles by the wind. Each impact made them flinch. "If it reaches this floor," his mom said quietly, "we get on the roof. Understand?" "Both of you." Jaden nodded, but his throat was too tight to speak. He watched the water rise, counting the stairs as they disappeared. 10 left. 9. 8. The baby had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. Sarah held him close, humming softly, tears running down her face. 7 stairs left. 6. 5. Night fell early, the storm turning afternoon into midnight. They couldn't see the water anymore, could only hear it rushing past, hungry and relentless. For stairs. 3. A new sound cut through the storm, splintering wood. The house groaned like it was in pain. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," his mom whispered, her grip on his shoulder tightening. 2 stairs left. That's when they heard the first scream from Sarah's house. High, desperate, human. Someone was still in there. Sarah's eyes went wide. "The Hendersons," she gasped. They were going to ride it out in their second-floor apartment. 1 stair left. Water began seeping under the door. The screams got louder. Water crept under the door like black fingers. The screams from Sarah's house cut through the howling wind, making Jaden's skin crawl. "Help, please. Somebody help us." His mom grabbed his arm. "Don't even think about it." But he was already moving to the window, pushing aside the broken shutter. The water had reached the second-floor windows of Sarah's house. Through the rain, he could see Mrs. Henderson at the window, holding something small and wrapped in blankets. "Is that—" Sarah squinted through the darkness. "Her granddaughter," his mom finished. "She was babysitting today." Another scream pierced the night. The water was rising faster now, already halfway up the second-floor windows. Debris slammed against both houses. Pieces of wood, furniture, whole sections of roofing. "I can make it," Jaden said quietly. "No." His mom's voice cracked like thunder. "I already lost your father. I won't lose you too." "Mom Dash," I said no. She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "You're 11 years old." 11. "You can't dash." A massive crash interrupted her. Part of Mrs. Henderson's window frame had given way. Water poured in, and her screams took on a new pitch of terror. "The baby," she shouted. "Someone please save the baby." Jaden's chest felt too tight. He could swim that distance. He knew he could. The current was strong, but he'd practiced in rough waters before. Not like this, though. Never like this. His father's voice echoed in his head. Too weak to handle anything. The water inside their room was ankle-deep now. Baby Marcus whimpered in Sarah's arms, and she backed away toward the window leading to the roof. "We need to get higher," his mom said, pulling at his arm. "Now, Jaden." But he couldn't move. Mrs. Henderson's cries filled his head, mixed with the roar of water and wind. The distance between the houses seemed to stretch forever, filled with swirling darkness and deadly debris. "I can't just let them die," he whispered. His mom's grip tightened. "You'll die too." "The current dash. I'm the strongest swimmer in the neighborhood." His voice grew stronger. You know I am? Baby, please. Tears streaked her face. Please don't do this. Another crash from next door. Mrs. Henderson screamed again, but weaker this time. The water was almost at the ceiling of her room. Jaden looked at his mom, really looked at her. Her eyes were wide with terror, her hands shaking as they gripped his shoulders. She'd already lost her husband. Now she might lose her son, too. I'm sorry, he said. Before she could stop him, he pulled away and rushed to the window. The wind hit him like a physical blow, nearly knocking him back. Rain stung his face, making it hard to see. Jaden, his mom's scream barely carried over the storm. Jaden, don't you dare! The water below churned with debris. A refrigerator floated past, followed by someone's front door. Each piece could knock him unconscious or pull him under. Mrs. Henderson's voice was getting weaker. The water in their room reached his knees. I have to try, he said, more to himself than anyone else. His mom grabbed him from behind, trying to pull him away from the window. She was crying, begging, praying all at once. Please, baby, please don't do this. We'll call for help. Someone will come. Please. But they both knew help wasn't coming. Not in time. Jaden turned to face her. I love you, Mom. Then he pulled free and dove through the window. The water hit him like a wall of ice. The current immediately grabbed him, trying to sweep him down the street-turned river. His head went under, and for a terrifying moment, he couldn't tell up from down. Training kicked in. He forced his way to the surface, gasping for air. His mom's scream seemed distant now, barely audible over the roar of water and wind. Something hard scraped against his leg, debris floating underneath. He kicked harder, fighting to stay on course. Sarah's house seemed miles away, though he knew it was only 30 feet. A massive wave lifted him, then dropped him back into the churning water. He went under again, swallowing what felt like half the ocean. His lungs burned. Surface. Had to reach the surface. His head broke through just as a piece of plywood shot past, missing him by inches. Mrs. Henderson's cries guided him. 20 feet now. 15. His muscles screamed with effort. Every stroke felt like swimming through concrete. Rain pelted his face, making it almost impossible to see. 10 feet. Something slammed into his shoulder, spinning him around. Pain shot through his arm, but he forced himself to keep going. 5 feet. The current slammed him against the side of Sarah's house. His fingers scrabbled for purchase, finally finding the window frame. Water poured through the broken window, trying to pull him in. Mrs. Henderson's face appeared above him, contorted with fear and desperation. The baby in her arms was wrapped in a pink blanket, eerily quiet. Help us, she sobbed. Please help us. Jaden pulled himself up, fighting against the current that wanted to tear him away. His shoulder blazed with pain, but he ignored it. Inside the room, the water had reached the ceiling. Mrs. Henderson stood on a floating dresser, holding the baby above her head. They had minutes, maybe seconds before the water filled the whole room. His father's voice echoed again in his head. Too weak to handle anything. Give me the baby, Jaden said, bracing himself against the window frame. Now! Mrs. Henderson hesitated for just a moment, then carefully passed her granddaughter through the window. The baby started crying, a good sign. She was alive. Hold on to something. Jaden shouted. Help is coming. It was a lie, but he couldn't take them both. The baby was all he could manage. Clutching the infant to his chest with one arm, he pushed off from the window. His mom's screams greeted him as he entered the current again. The journey back would be even harder, and the water was still rising. The current hit Jaden like a truck. He spun in the water, struggling to keep the baby's head above the surface. The pink blanket was soaked, adding weight he couldn't afford. Hold on, he gasped, though the infant couldn't understand. Just hold on. A wave slammed them against a floating piece of fence. Pain shot through his already injured shoulder. The baby wailed, the sound barely audible over the storm. Something crackled nearby, a sharp, electric sound that made his hair stand on end. Through the rain, he saw sparks flying from a down power line thrashing in the wind like an angry snake. Jaden, his mom's voice carried over the chaos. This way. Follow my voice. He kicked hard, trying to angle away from the power line. The current fought him every inch, trying to drag them toward the sparking cable. His legs burned from the effort. A massive crash behind him made him turn. Sarah's house groaned, then collapsed in on itself. Mrs. Henderson's final scream cut off abruptly. "No," he choked out. "No, no, no." The baby squirmed in his arms, her cries growing weaker. She was getting cold, too cold. A chunk of roofing material shot past his head. He ducked underwater just in time, keeping the baby lifted as high as he could. When he surfaced, he'd lost sight of his house. "Mom," he screamed. "Where are you?" No answer. Just wind and rain and the endless roar of water. His legs felt like lead. Each kick came slower than the last. The current pushed them toward the power line again, sparks reflecting off the black water. Something brushed his leg underwater. He kicked away frantically, imagining snakes or worse things swept up in the flood. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. "Please help us." As if in answer, a flash of lightning illuminated everything for a split second. He caught a glimpse of his house. They'd been pushed 20 feet downstream. "Jaden," his mom again, closer this time. "To your left." He turned, fighting the current. Each stroke felt like swimming through mud. The baby had stopped crying, and that scared him more than anything. Another piece of debris slammed into his back. He gasped in pain, but kept going. 10 feet to the house. 8. 6. The power line hit the water behind them with a crack and a shower of sparks. The shock wave pushed them forward, just enough to put the house within reach. His fingers brushed the wall, trying to find a grip on the slick surface. Water pulled at his legs, trying to tear him away. "Grab my hand." His mom leaned out the window, stretching toward them. He reached up, fingertips barely touching hers. The baby stirred weakly against his chest. "I can't," he gasped. "Too far." "Yes, you can." She leaned out further, dangerously far. "Give me the baby first." He lifted the infant as high as he could. For one terrifying moment, she was suspended between them, over the churning water. Then his mom had her, pulling her to safety. "Now you," she screamed. "Grab my hand." His strength was almost gone. The current tugged harder, and his grip on the wall started to slip. "I can't." His voice came out as a whisper. "Don't you dare give up." His mom's voice cracked with desperation. "You are not weak. You hear me? You are not what he said." The words hit harder than any debris. With his last surge of strength, Jaden pushed up from the wall. His hand found his mom's. She pulled while he kicked, fighting against the water one last time. His chest hit the window frame, then his hips. Then he was falling forward into the room. Into his mom's arms, they collapsed on the wet floor, both gasping. The baby lay wrapped in dry blankets nearby, crying with renewed strength. "Don't you ever," his mom sobbed, holding him tight, "ever do that to me again." Jaden couldn't answer. His whole body shook with exhaustion and cold. Through blurry eyes, he saw Sarah kneeling beside them, checking the baby. "She's okay," Sarah said, voice thick with tears. "Cold, but okay." The house creaked ominously around them. Water still poured in under the door, now almost 2 feet deep in the room. "We need to move," his mom said. "The roof. Now." Jaden tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. His mom and Sarah half carried him toward the window that led to the roof access. "Wait," he mumbled. "Mrs. Henderson, I know, baby." His mom's voice broke. "I know." They climbed out onto the roof as more of the neighborhood disappeared under the rising water. The wind tried to tear them off their perch, but they huddled together, holding on. Jaden watched Sarah's house finish collapsing, vanishing beneath the flood. His chest felt hollow. "I couldn't save her," he whispered. His mom pulled him closer. "You saved who you could. That's all anyone can do." The baby's cries merged with the sound of the storm. Somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens wailed, too far away to help. They had hours left before dawn. Hours of wind and rain and rising water. But Jaden didn't feel cold anymore, despite his soaked clothes and exhausted muscles. His dad's voice was gone from his head. In its place, he heard only the baby's cries, proof that sometimes, even when the whole world turned into darkness and water, you could still save something. Someone. A massive wave crashed against the house, making them all grab tighter to the roof tiles. The night was far from over, and the water kept rising. The wind tore at them like a living thing, trying to rip them from their precarious shelter on the roof. Another house collapsed nearby, the sound lost in the storm's roar. Jaden's mom gripped his arm tighter. "Look," Sarah pointed through the rain. "There's someone at my window." Jaden squinted against the darkness. A figure pressed against the second-floor window of Sarah's house, hands pounding on the glass. Even through the storm, he could hear screaming. "It's Lisa," Sarah gasped. "My neighbor. She must have been trapped upstairs." The woman held something in her arms, something small. "She has her baby with her," Sarah's voice cracked. "Oh God, Charlie's only 6 months old." Jaden's muscles still burned from the last rescue. His shoulder throbbed where debris had hit him. But he was already calculating the distance, watching the current's pattern. "No." His mom's grip tightened. "You almost died last time." "Mom Dash." "I said no." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "You can barely move." The current's even stronger now. A massive crack split the air. Part of Sarah's roof peeled away like paper, disappearing into the night. The house groaned, listing to one side. "It's going to collapse," Sarah whispered. Just like Mrs. Henderson's side, the baby Jaden had rescued earlier whimpered in Sarah's arms. His mom still gripped him tight, but he could feel her shaking. "I have to try," he said quietly. "You'll die." His mom's voice broke. "The water's too high, the current's too strong, Dash. If I don't, they die for sure." He met her eyes. "You know that?" Lightning flashed, illuminating Lisa's face in the window. Pure terror. The baby in her arms wasn't crying anymore. His mom's hands fell away from his face. "You're just like your father," she whispered. "Always had to be the hero." "No." Jaden stood carefully on the slick roof. "Dad ran away. I'm staying right here. I'm just going to help first." Sarah touched his arm. "Be careful. Please." He nodded, then turned to his mom. "I promise I'll come back." Before she could answer, he slid down the roof toward the water. The current looked even stronger from here, carrying whole trees past like twigs. "Wait!" His mom called. "Take this." She pulled off her robe, the thick one she used after showers. He caught it, understanding immediately. Something to wrap the baby in. The water hit him like ice again, but he was ready this time. He let the current take him for a moment, then angled towards Sarah's house. His muscles remembered what to do. Halfway there, something huge crashed into the water upstream. A car, maybe, or part of a house. Whatever it was sent a wave of debris tumbling toward him. Jaden dove deep, kicking hard. Darkness pressed in from all sides. His lungs burned. When he surfaced, Sarah's house had gotten closer, but now it swayed dangerously. "Help!" Lisa screamed from the window. "Please help us." "I'm coming," he shouted back, though the wind probably carried his voice away. A roof beam snapped somewhere in the house. The whole structure shifted with a sound like thunder. 5 more feet. His shoulders blazed with pain, but he kept going. 4 feet. The baby in Lisa's arms still hadn't moved. 3 feet. Water poured through cracks in the walls. 2 feet. The house groaned again, deeper this time. His hand found the window ledge just as another section of roof tore away. Lisa screamed, clutching her baby tighter. "Give him to me." Jaden pulled himself up to the window. "Now." Lisa stared at him with wild eyes. "Who Dash? There's no time." He reached through the broken window. "The house is going to collapse." She hesitated for just a second, then passed Charlie through. The baby was cold, too cold, wrapped only in a thin blanket. Jaden quickly wrapped him in his mom's robe. "Hold on to something. Help is coming." Another lie, but he couldn't carry them both. Not in this current. He pushed off from the window just as the house gave another massive shudder. Lisa's scream followed him into the water. The current grabbed them immediately, trying to pull them under. Charlie didn't move or cry. Jaden's heart pounded against his ribs. "Stay with me," he gasped, keeping the baby's face above water. "Please stay with me." Something slammed into his legs underwater. Pain shot through his knee, but he kept kicking. His house seemed impossibly far away. Behind him, Sarah's house made a sound like the world ending. He didn't turn to look. Couldn't. Almost there. he whispered to Charlie. Almost there. His legs felt like lead. Each kick came slower than the last. The current pushed them downstream, past his house. Jaden, his mom's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. To your right. He turned, fighting the water. Every muscle screamed for rest. The baby felt heavier with each stroke. Lightning flashed again. He caught a glimpse of his mom leaning out from the roof, reaching toward them. 10 feet away. His vision blurred with exhaustion. 8 feet. His right leg cramped, sending him under for a moment. 6 feet. Charlie stirred weakly in his arms. 4 feet. His mom's hand stretched toward them. 2 feet. His fingers brushed the roof tiles. Then his mom had Charlie, pulling him to safety. Sarah helped drag Jaden up after. He collapsed on the roof, gasping. Through the rain, he heard Charlie start to cry. He's breathing, Sarah said, relief clear in her voice. He's actually breathing. Jaden tried to look back towards Sarah's house, but his mom pulled him close, blocking his view. Don't, she whispered. There's nothing we could do. They huddled together on the roof, 2 babies crying now, while the storm raged around them. Jaden's whole body shook with exhaustion and cold. But somewhere deep inside, past the pain and fear and grief, a small voice whispered, "You're not weak. You're not running away. You're not your father's son." The storm threw rain and debris at them, but they held on, together, waiting for dawn. The water kept rising. It lapped at the edges of the roof now, hungry for more. Jaden watched another house collapse downstream, vanishing beneath the flood. "We need to move higher," his mom said, voice tight with fear. "The water's coming up too fast." Lightning revealed what they'd all been trying not to see. Their entire street had become a river. Cars, trees, and pieces of houses rushed past in the current. The wind howled louder than ever. Sarah clutched both babies close. "Where can we go? We're already on the roof." Jaden scanned the darkness. Through the rain, he could just make out the Morrisons' 3-story house on higher ground. It stood empty, the family long gone to safety. "There," he pointed. "We can make it to the big house." His mom followed his gaze. "That's 200 feet away." The current's flowing that direction. Jaden forced himself to stand, legs shaking with exhaustion. "We can use it. You can barely walk." His mom grabbed his arm, and the baby's dash, a massive wave crashed over the edge of the roof, nearly sweeping Sarah and the infants away. They scrambled higher, but there wasn't much roof left. "We don't have a choice," Jaden said. "The water's rising too fast." As if to prove his point, another wave broke over them. The house groaned underneath, timbers creaking. His mom looked at the Morrisons' house, then back at the rising water. How? Jaden's mind raced. They needed something that could float, something to keep the babies out of the water. Lightning flashed again. He saw it. The plastic kiddie pool he and the neighbor kids used in summer, lodged against the chimney. "Help me," he said, already moving toward it. Together, they dragged the pool free. It was cracked on one side, but still mostly solid. "The babies can ride in this," Jaden explained. "Sarah and I will push from behind. Mom, you stay in front to guide it." "Absolutely not," his mom started, but another wave cut her off. The house shuddered beneath them. A window exploded somewhere below, letting in more water. "We go now," Jaden said, "or we don't go at all." Sarah carefully placed both babies in the pool. They cried weakly, exhausted from cold and fear. His mom stared at him for a long moment. "When did you grow up so fast?" "When Dad left," he said simply. "Ready?" She nodded, tears mixing with rain on her face. They positioned themselves around the pool, his mom in front, Jaden and Sarah behind. On 3, Jaden called over the wind. 1, 2. The house gave one final groan. 3. They pushed off into the current. The pool spun wildly for a moment before his mom got it pointed in the right direction. Cold water shocked Jaden's system again, but he kept kicking. Sarah matched his pace beside him, her face set with determination. "Left," his mom shouted. "Big tree coming." They steered around it, but the motion sent them closer to a tangle of power lines thrashing in the water. "Right, right." Jaden kicked harder, muscles burning. The Morrisons' house seemed to get further away instead of closer. Something scraped against his legs underwater. He yelled in pain, but kept going. Halfway there, his mom called. Keep going. The babies had stopped crying. Jaden couldn't tell if that was good or bad. Sarah gasped beside him. My legs? I can't. Yes, you can, he shouted. Just a little further. A massive wave lifted them all, then dropped them back into the chaos. Water filled Jaden's mouth, tasting of salt and mud and gasoline. The pool started to spin again. His mom fought to keep it steady. The crack! Sarah cried. It's getting bigger. Water seeped into the pool through the damaged side. The babies started crying again as cold water reached them. Almost there. His mom's voice carried over the storm. 20 more feet. Jaden's vision blurred. Every muscle screamed for rest. But he could see the Morrisons' house clearly now. Solid, 3 stories of safety waiting for them. 10 feet. Something huge moved in the water behind them. Jaden turned and saw their house finally give in to the flood, walls collapsing like wet cardboard. Now, his mom screamed, push hard. They surged forward with their last strength. The pool bumped against the Morrisons' wall. His mom grabbed a drain pipe, anchoring them. Sarah, lift them up. Sarah raised the babies one at a time. Jaden's mom pulled them to safety through a broken window. Your turn, Jaden told Sarah. She shook her head. You first. You're hurt worse. Go. She hesitated, then let his mom help her through the window. The pool cracked completely, splitting in half. Jaden went under for a moment before finding the drain pipe. Give me your hand. His mom reached down. His fingers felt frozen. He couldn't grip properly. I can't. Yes, you can. She stretched further. You didn't come this far to give up now. With his last surge of strength, Jaden reached up. Their hands locked. Sarah grabbed his other arm. Together, they pulled him through the window. They collapsed on the floor of the Morrisons' living room, gasping and shivering. Water poured in through broken windows, but they were above the flood line. The babies cried in harmony, the most beautiful sound Jaden had ever heard. His mom pulled him close, her whole body shaking. Don't you ever scare me like that again. No promises, he mumbled. She laughed, a sound full of tears and relief and exhaustion. Outside, the storm still raged. Their house was gone. Mrs. Henderson was gone. Lisa was gone. Their whole street had disappeared beneath angry water. But they were alive. They had saved what they could. Jaden closed his eyes, too tired to keep them open. His mom's arms held him tight. Sarah hummed softly to the babies nearby. They had made it. The rest could wait until morning. The first light of day crept through broken windows, painting the Morrisons' flooded living room in shades of gray. Jaden woke to the sound of helicopter rotors. Mom? His voice came out rough, throat raw from swallowing flood water. Here, baby. She sat nearby, both infants wrapped in dry curtains she'd torn down. Sarah slept curled against a wall. The wind had died down to a whisper. Outside, the water still moved past the house, but slower now. Calmer. Jaden tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Every muscle screamed in protest. Easy, his mom said. You've been asleep for a few hours. He made it to a window on wobbly legs. Their street had vanished, replaced by a muddy river dotted with debris. No sign of their house. No sign of any houses. The helicopter noise grew louder. A Coast Guard rescue craft appeared over the treetops, searchlight sweeping the water. Hey, Jaden waved through the broken window. Down here. Sarah jerked awake at his shout. What's happening? Help's coming, his mom said, voice thick with relief. Finally, the helicopter spotted them, hovering closer. A rescue worker rappelled down to a flat section of roof. Anyone hurt? The man had a shout over the rotors. The babies need medical attention. Jaden's mom called back. They were in the flood. More rescuers descended. They came through the window with emergency blankets and first aid supplies. How many? One asked, checking Charlie's vital signs. 5, Jaden's mom answered. 2 infants. The rescuer paused, looking around. You all made it here together? My son. She put a hand on Jaden's shoulder. He saved the babies. Swam through the flood. The rescue workers exchanged looks. One spoke into his radio. We've got a priority evac. 2 infants, 3 adults. And someone tell command, we found them. Found who? Jaden asked. The missing babies. We got reports about 2 infants trapped in the flood zone. Been searching all night. Sarah clutched Charlie closer. There were others. Our neighbors. The rescuer's face softened. We'll keep looking. Right now, let's get you all to safety. They brought up a rescue basket. The babies went first, secured safely with Sarah. As they were lifted toward the helicopter, Charlie started crying again, strong, healthy wails that made Jaden smile despite his exhaustion. His mom went next, though she argued to stay with him. Go, he insisted. I'm right behind you. When his turn came, the rescuer helped him into the basket. Pain shot through his legs and shoulder as they lifted off. From above, the destruction stretched forever. The entire neighborhood sat under feet of muddy water. Cars floated like toys. Houses had crumbled or washed away completely. Something caught in his throat. Not water this time. Tears. They loaded him into the helicopter. His mom immediately pulled him close. Look, she pointed as they rose higher. News helicopters circled the area. In the distance, more rescue crews approached. You okay? The medic asked, checking Jaden's vital signs. He nodded, unable to speak. The reality of everything hit him at once. Mrs. Henderson, Lisa, their house, all gone. Hey, the medic squeezed his shoulder. You did good, kid. Real good. The babies slept now, properly wrapped in emergency blankets. Sarah hadn't stopped crying since they lifted off. The Hendersons, she whispered. Lisa and Charlie. They were my only friends here. Charlie's right there, Jaden said quietly. You saved him. We saved him. She looked at the sleeping baby, then back at Jaden. You saved him. You saved both of them. His mom's arms tightened around him. He leaned into her warmth, letting his eyes close. The helicopter carried them toward the evacuation center. Below, the rising sun painted the floodwaters gold, hiding their darkness, their hunger, their destruction. They landed at a high school-turned-emergency shelter. Medical teams waited with stretchers and supplies. Priority cases, someone shouted. Infants first. They rushed Charlie and the Henderson baby into the building. Sarah followed close behind, holding the paramedic's arm for support. Jaden tried to walk, but stumbled. 2 medics caught him. Easy there, hero, one said. Let's get you checked out. They helped him onto a stretcher. His mom never left his side. Inside, the gym had transformed into a makeshift hospital. Hundreds of people filled the space. Some injured, some crying, some just staring blankly ahead. Over here! A doctor waved them to an examination area. What happened? His mom told the story while they checked him over. Bruised ribs, strained shoulder, mild hypothermia, exhaustion. He needs rest, the doctor said, and warmth, but he'll be fine. Nearby, other doctors examined the babies. Their cries echoed through the gym, strong, alive, angry at the world. News spread quickly through the shelter. People stopped by their cot, asking if it was true. Did a kid really save 2 babies from the flood? Jaden pretended to sleep. He didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to remember the ones he couldn't save. His mom fielded the questions, keeping people back. Let him rest, she told them. Please. But word kept spreading. Phones came out recording. Someone from the news arrived with a camera. Not now, his mom said firmly. My son needs to sleep. He drifted in and out of consciousness, warm for the first time in what felt like forever. The baby's cries mixed with shelter noise, people talking, children crying, medical equipment beeping. Mom, he mumbled. Right here, baby. Our house. Sure. She stroked his hair. Don't worry about that now. Where will we go? We'll figure it out. Her voice stayed steady. Together, the shelter grew quieter as morning turned to afternoon. Sarah came by with Charlie, both wrapped in Red Cross blankets. He's doing great, she said. The doctors say he'll be fine. Jaden managed a small smile. Good. The other baby too, she added. They found Mrs. Henderson's daughter. She's on her way. The guilt hit him again. I couldn't save Dash. Stop. Sarah took his hand. You saved who you could. That's more than anyone else did. More people arrived at the shelter as rescue crews found them. Each new arrival brought stories of destruction, of loss, of narrow escapes. But they also brought stories of a boy who swam through the flood to save two babies. The story grew with each telling. Jaden kept his eyes closed, pretending to sleep. He didn't feel like a hero. Heroes saved everyone. He had left people behind. His mom seemed to read his thoughts. "You did everything you could," she whispered. "More than anyone could have expected. I'm so proud of you." Outside, the sun climbed higher. Helicopters still buzzed overhead, searching for survivors. The flood waters began to recede, revealing the full extent of the destruction. But in the shelter, two babies cried with healthy lungs. And a boy finally slept, his mother's arms holding him safe, keeping the memories at bay for a little while longer. Morning had come. They had survived. The rest would come later. 3 days after the flood, Jaden sat on the steps of the emergency shelter, watching another news van pull into the parking lot. "Not again," he muttered. His mom appeared behind him. "We don't have to talk to them." The shelter had become their temporary home, along with hundreds of others displaced by Hurricane Marcus. The gym still housed most survivors, but they'd been moved to a small classroom after the first reporter showed up. A man in an expensive suit stepped out of a black SUV. Not a reporter this time. "Jaden?" The man approached, looking at a phone. "Jaden Miller?" His mom stepped forward. "Who's asking?" "Robert Morrison." The man extended his hand. "Tommy's father." Jaden's stomach tightened. He remembered Tommy's mockery, his mother firing his mom right before the storm. "What do you want?" His voice came out harder than intended. Mr. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "May we talk inside?" Privately, they found an empty classroom. Jaden's muscles still ached as he sat, a reminder of that night in the flood. "I'll be direct," Mr. Morrison said. "You saved 2 lives during that hurricane. One of them was my niece." Jaden blinked. "What?" "The Henderson baby. Grace. She's my sister's granddaughter." He cleared his throat. "When we evacuated, we thought they'd gone to another shelter. By the time we realized..." Silence filled the room. Jaden remembered Mrs. Henderson's final scream as the house collapsed. "I couldn't save her," he said quietly. "I tried, but you saved Grace." Mr. Morrison's voice cracked. "When no one else could. When I couldn't." His mom touched Jaden's shoulder. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Morrison?" The man opened his briefcase. "2 things. First this." He handed them an envelope. Inside was a check with more zeros than Jaden had ever seen. "We can't," his mom started. "Please." Mr. Morrison held up a hand. "My family. We owe you more than we can ever repay. This is just the start." "The start?" He pulled out more papers. "The second thing. Grace's parents, they've set up a scholarship fund. For you, Jaden. Full ride to any school you choose, when you're ready." The room spun slightly. Jaden grabbed his chair to steady himself. "But why?" "Because courage like yours deserves to be rewarded." Mr. Morrison looked down. "And because my son was wrong about you." "We all were." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah stood there with Charlie, both looking better after days of proper care. "Sorry," she said. "Didn't know you had company." "Come in." Jaden's mom waved her forward. "You should hear this too." Mr. Morrison looked at Charlie, then back at his papers. "The second baby you saved?" Sarah nodded. "My Charlie. Then this involves you as well." He pulled out another envelope. "The community has started a fund for both families." Jaden watched Sarah open her envelope, saw her hands shake at the amount. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Your homes were destroyed," Mr. Morrison explained. "The beachfront residents were safe in our evacuation houses." It didn't feel right. More people appeared at the door. Rescue workers, shelter volunteers, other survivors. Word spread fast in the shelter. "There's one more thing." Mr. Morrison stood. "My wife and I, we're leaving Key West. Moving inland. Our house. It's yours if you want it." Silence fell over the room. Jaden looked at his mom, saw tears in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison," she started. "Robert, please." "Robert." She took a deep breath. "This is too much. It's not enough." He looked at Jaden. "My son spent years looking down on you. We all did. But when the storm came, when it mattered, you proved what real courage looks like." Charlie started crying softly. Sarah bounced him gently, her own tears falling. The house needs some repairs, Mr. Morrison continued. Storm damage. But it's on higher ground. 3 stories. Plenty of room for both families. Jaden thought about their old house, now somewhere under mud and debris. About Mrs. Henderson. About Lisa. The ones I couldn't save, he said quietly. Mr. Morrison knelt in front of him. You did more than anyone could have expected. More than any of us would have dared. Outside, another news van pulled up. Reporters had been trying to interview him for days. They want to talk to you, Mr. Morrison said. When you're ready. Your story, it gives people hope. I'm not a hero. The words came out automatically. Yes, you are. Sarah stepped forward. You saved my boy. You saved Grace. You gave up everything to help others. His mom squeezed his shoulder. You're not your father's son. You're better. The shelter director appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone else here to see you. A woman rushed in, carrying Grace. The baby wore clean clothes now, her color healthy. I had to come, the woman, Grace's mother, said through tears. I had to thank you in person. She handed Grace to Jaden. The baby grabbed his fingers, squeezing tight. Something broke inside him. All the pain, the fear, the guilt of that night rushed out. I couldn't save your mother, he told Grace softly. But you saved her. Grace's mother touched his cheek. You saved them both. More people crowded the doorway. Survivors. Rescue workers. News crews trying to get photos. Mr. Morrison stood. Take the house. Take the money. Take the scholarship. It's the least we can do. Jaden looked at his mom. She wiped her eyes, nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Okay. The room erupted in applause. Sarah hugged them both. Charlie squished between them. Outside, the sun broke through clouds for the first time in days. The flood waters had receded, leaving destruction behind. But here in this small classroom, something else remained. Hope. Change. A future they never expected. Grace fell asleep in Jaden's arms, trusting and safe. Charlie babbled happily nearby. They had survived the storm. Now they could begin again. 1 month after Hurricane Marcus, Jaden stood in front of Key West Middle School's packed auditorium. His new shoes felt strange. Everything felt strange since the storm. Go on, his mom whispered from behind him. You can do this. The principal stood at the podium, finishing his speech. And so today, we honor true courage, true heroism. Please welcome Jaden Miller. The applause felt too loud. Camera flashes popped from the audience. Jaden's legs shook as he approached the podium. Familiar faces filled the crowd. Sarah sat in the front row, Charlie sleeping in her arms. The Morrisons had come back for the ceremony. Grace nestled against her mother's chest. Even Tommy was there, looking anywhere but at Jaden. His mom had helped him write a speech, but the paper crumpled in his sweaty hands. Instead, he looked at the babies, alive, healthy, growing. I'm not good at speeches, he started. His voice echoed through the microphone. I'm not good at a lot of things. The audience went quiet. That night, during the storm, he gripped the podium harder. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just couldn't let them die. In the third row, Mrs. Henderson's daughter wiped her eyes. She'd thanked him a dozen times for saving Grace, never once blaming him for her mother. People keep calling me brave. His voice shook slightly. But brave means you're not scared. I was terrified. Sarah smiled encouragingly, bouncing Charlie gently. The real heroes, Jaden continued, were the ones who stayed behind. Mrs. Henderson, who made sure her granddaughter had a chance. Lisa, who held on as long as she could to keep her baby safe. The auditorium remained silent except for a few muffled sobs. Everyone keeps asking why I did it. Why I went into the flood. He looked at his mom, saw tears on her cheeks. 3 years ago, my dad left us, called me weak, said I'd never amount to anything. Tommy Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But strength isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what's right anyway. It's about not running away when things get hard. Charlie woke up, making happy baby noises that echoed through the quiet auditorium. I couldn't save everyone. Jaden's voice cracked. I'll carry that forever. But these babies, he gestured to Charlie and Grace. They'll grow up. They'll have chances. That's what matters. The principal stepped forward with a plaque, but Jaden wasn't finished. There's one more hero I need to talk about. He turned to face his mom. Someone who taught me that real strength is staying when it's hard, loving when it hurts, never giving up. His mom pressed a hand to her mouth, tears flowing freely now. My mom lost everything in that storm. Our house, her job, everything we owned. But she never once told me I was wrong to help. Never once put her loss above those babies' lives. Sarah stood, carrying Charlie to the stage. Grace's mother followed with Grace. So this, Jaden held up the plaque they'd given him. This belongs to all of us. The ones we lost, the ones who survived, and the ones who taught us what real courage looks like. The applause started slowly, then built until it shook the walls. Camera flashes turned the stage into daylight. Later, after the ceremony, they drove to their new home, the Morrisons' old house, now repaired and ready. Sarah had taken the third floor with Charlie. Jaden and his mom had the second. The first floor they shared, slowly turning it from a mansion into a home. "You did good today," his mom said as they walked inside. "Real good?" The sound of waves drifted through open windows, but it didn't frighten him anymore. The ocean had taken much, but it had given something too. A chance to prove himself, to become someone his father never thought he could be. Sarah came down with Charlie, who had started crawling last week. "Grace and her mom are coming for dinner," she said. They brought pictures from the ceremony. The kitchen still felt too big, too fancy, but the laughter that filled it made it theirs. Grace arrived with her parents, bigger now, always smiling. The babies played on a blanket while the adults cooked. "Look at them," Sarah said softly. "They'll never remember that night." "But we will," Jaden's mom replied. "We'll tell them when they're older. About courage, about sacrifice, about love." A knock at the door surprised them. Tommy Morrison stood there, looking uncomfortable. Can I come in?" Jaden hesitated, then nodded. Tommy had been different since the storm. Quieter, humbler. "I wanted to say..." Tommy stared at his shoes. "I'm sorry. For everything before. I was wrong about you." The babies laughed on their blanket, oblivious to the moment. "Want to stay for dinner?" Jaden asked. Tommy's head snapped up in surprise. "Really? Really?" They ate together, former enemies turned. Something else. Not quite friends, but getting there. The babies provided entertainment, throwing food and giggling. After dinner, Jaden walked to the beach. The sunset painted everything gold, like that morning after the storm. His mom found him there, staring at the waves. "Penny for your thoughts?" He picked up a shell, tossed it into the water. "Just thinking about Dad." "Oh, I used to wish he'd come back." Jaden watched the shell disappear beneath the waves. "Used to think I needed him to be strong." His mom waited silently. "But I don't need him, I mean..." He turned to face her. "I've got you. I've got Sarah and the babies. I've got me." She pulled him close, kissing the top of his head like she used to when he was small. "You've always been strong," she said. "You just needed to find it for yourself." The waves rolled in, gentle now, peaceful. Somewhere out there, hurricane season continued. Other storms would come, but they were ready now, stronger, together. A hero, they called him, but he knew better. He was just a boy who couldn't let babies drown. A son who finally understood what real strength meant. A friend who learned that family isn't always who you're born to, but who you choose to save. The sun set over Key West, painting the sky in colors no storm could wash away. Inside the house, babies laughed. Life continued. They had survived. They had grown. They were home. And that was all that mattered.